Marcus had always been the kind of man who kept to himself. At 52, he lived alone in a small house on Maple Street, where he had resided for the past 15 years. His neighbors knew him as the quiet guy who worked at the local hardware store and never caused any trouble. Every morning, Marcus would wake up at 6, make his coffee, and carefully place his trash cans at the curb before heading to work. His routine was simple and predictable. He took pride in keeping his property neat and tidy. The small front yard was always mowed, the driveway was swept clean, and his trash cans were positioned perfectly straight along the curb. Marcus believed in doing things the right way, even if nobody was watching. 3 houses down lived Sandra Mitchell, a woman in her early 40s who had moved to the neighborhood about 2 years ago. Sandra was everything Marcus was not. She was loud, confrontational, and seemed to thrive on drama. Her house was often filled with visitors who played music late into the night and left their cars blocking driveways. While most neighbors had learned to avoid her, Marcus had somehow become her favorite target. It started small. Sandra would make snide comments about his lawn when she walked by. She would park her car in a way that made it difficult for Marcus to back out of his driveway. When he politely asked her to move it, she would laugh and tell him to figure it out himself. Marcus, being a peaceful man, would simply find another way around the problem rather than escalate the situation. Sandra seemed to interpret his kindness as weakness. She would throw her cigarette butts into his yard and let her dog use his lawn as a bathroom without cleaning up after it. When Marcus mentioned these issues to her, she would roll her eyes and walk away, muttering something about him being too uptight. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. Marcus had placed his trash cans out as usual, making sure they were positioned correctly and not blocking any part of the sidewalk. He took extra care that morning because it was recycling day, and he had sorted everything properly. As he was getting into his car to leave for work, he noticed Sandra watching him from her front porch with a strange smile on her face. Marcus drove to work thinking nothing of it, but when he returned home that evening, he found his trash scattered across his lawn and the street. The cans were knocked over and dented, and some of his garbage had been blown into other yards by the wind. His carefully sorted recycling was mixed with regular trash, and several items had been crushed under what looked like tire marks. His first thought was that it might have been an accident. Maybe the garbage truck had knocked them over, or perhaps a strong wind had blown them down. But as Marcus began cleaning up the mess, Mrs. Peterson from next door came over to help. She was an elderly woman who spent most of her day sitting by her front window, watching the neighborhood activities. Mrs. Peterson shook her head as she helped him pick up the scattered papers. She told him that she had seen Sandra deliberately kick over his trash cans around noon, then drive her car over some of the spilled contents. Sandra had stood there laughing before going back into her house, leaving the mess for Marcus to discover when he came home from work. Marcus felt a mixture of anger and disbelief wash over him. He had never done anything to deserve this kind of treatment. He had always been respectful and neighborly, even when Sandra had been difficult. But this was different. This was deliberate destruction of his property and a complete violation of basic human decency. That night, Marcus lay in bed thinking about what had happened. Part of him wanted to march over to Sandra's house and confront her directly. Another part of him considered calling the police, though he knew that proving she had knocked over his trash cans would be difficult. Mrs. Peterson was willing to be a witness, but Marcus worried about dragging the elderly woman into a neighborhood dispute. As he stared at the ceiling, Marcus realized that Sandra's behavior was escalating. What had started as petty annoyances had now become outright vandalism. If he did nothing, she would likely see it as permission to continue or even escalate further. But Marcus was not the type of person to engage in a screaming match or seek revenge through similarly destructive behavior. By morning, Marcus had made a decision. He would not let Sandra's bullying behavior go unchallenged, but he would handle it in his own way. He was a patient man who believed in thinking problems through carefully before acting. Sandra might think she had the upper hand because she was louder and more aggressive, but Marcus had something she didn't expect: the ability to plan and the patience to execute that plan perfectly. As he got ready for work the next morning, Marcus looked out his window and saw Sandra watching him again from her porch. This time, instead of feeling frustrated or intimidated, Marcus felt a calm sense of determination. Sandra thought she could bully him because he was quiet and kept to himself. She was about to learn that quiet people often have the most creative solutions to problems. Marcus placed his new trash cans at the curb, making sure they were positioned exactly as they should be. But this time he had something extra planned. As he drove away to work, he caught sight of Sandra in his rearview mirror, walking toward his trash cans with the same malicious smile she had worn the day before. Marcus spent his lunch break that day doing something he had never done before, researching security cameras. He walked to the electronics store 3 blocks from the hardware store where he worked, and spoke with the sales clerk about home security options. The young man behind the counter was enthusiastic about explaining the different types of cameras available, from basic motion-activated models to sophisticated systems that could stream video directly to a smartphone. Marcus listened carefully, asking practical questions about installation, recording time, and video quality. He learned that some cameras were so small they could be hidden almost anywhere, while others were designed to be visible as a deterrent. The sales clerk assumed Marcus was worried about break-ins or package theft, common concerns in any neighborhood. Marcus didn't correct him. After comparing several options, Marcus chose a compact wireless camera that could record in high definition and was activated by motion. The battery lasted for weeks, and it could store several hours of video footage. Best of all, it was small enough to be concealed easily, and came with a magnetic mount that would stick to metal surfaces. When Marcus returned home that evening, he was not surprised to find his trash cans knocked over again. This time, the damage was even worse. Sandra had not only scattered his garbage, but had also taken the time to tear open several bags, spreading coffee grounds and food scraps across his driveway. A half-empty bottle of soda had been poured over the mess, creating a sticky puddle that attracted flies. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her front door as Marcus began the cleanup process. The elderly woman looked genuinely upset as she watched him scrape garbage off his driveway with a shovel. She told him that Sandra had been even more aggressive today, using her foot to kick the contents of the bags as far as possible, and laughing loudly enough that several other neighbors had come to their windows to see what was happening. As Marcus worked, he noticed that Sandra's front porch light was on, and her curtains were open just enough for her to watch his humiliation. Every few minutes he could see movement behind the window, and once he was certain he saw her taking pictures with her phone. The realization that Sandra was documenting his misery for her own entertainment filled Marcus with a cold anger he had rarely experienced. That night, Marcus read the instruction manual for his new security camera 3 times. He practiced setting it up in different locations around his house, learning how to adjust the angle and test the motion sensor. The camera came with an app that would send alerts to his phone whenever motion was detected, and he could watch the live feed from anywhere. The next morning, Marcus woke up earlier than usual. He positioned his trash cans at the curb as always, but this time he also carefully installed his hidden camera in a spot where it would have a perfect view of the area. The camera was small enough to fit behind a piece of trim on his porch, completely invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. Marcus tested the angle several times to make sure it would capture anyone who approached his trash cans. Before leaving for work, Marcus double-checked that the camera was recording and that his phone was receiving the motion alerts correctly. He felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness as he drove away. Part of him hoped that Sandra would leave his trash alone now that he had taken precautions, but another part of him suspected that her behavior would continue until she faced real consequences. Around 11:30 that morning, Marcus's phone buzzed with a motion alert. He was helping a customer select paint colors, so he couldn't check the notification immediately. 20 minutes later, another alert came through. By lunchtime, he had received 4 separate motion notifications. Marcus found a quiet spot in the store's break room and opened the camera app on his phone. What he saw made his hands shake with anger. The first video showed Sandra approaching his trash cans with a determined expression on her face. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then deliberately kicked over the first can. The second video captured her stomping on several of the bags that had spilled out, grinding food waste into his driveway with her heel. The third video was the most damning. Sandra had returned with a friend, a younger woman Marcus didn't recognize. The 2 women were laughing as they scattered the remaining trash across his lawn. Sandra was clearly narrating the situation to her friend, pointing at Marcus's house and making exaggerated gestures. At one point, the friend picked up what looked like a container of leftover Chinese food and dumped it on Marcus's front steps. The fourth video showed Sandra alone again, this time using a stick to spread the garbage even further. She spent several minutes making sure the mess was as extensive and disgusting as possible. Before leaving, she took out her phone and recorded the destruction, presumably to share with others later. Marcus saved all 4 videos to his phone and backed them up to his email account. The footage was crystal clear, showing Sandra's face and actions in perfect detail. There was no question about who was responsible for the vandalism, and the videos clearly showed that it was deliberate and malicious rather than accidental. As Marcus watched the videos again during his lunch break, he felt a sense of satisfaction mixed with his anger. Sandra had no idea that her actions were being recorded. She thought she was getting away with bullying him because he was too polite to fight back. She had even brought a friend to witness her harassment, which showed how confident she was that there would be no consequences for her behavior. But Marcus was not ready to reveal his evidence yet. He wanted to gather more footage to establish a clear pattern of harassment. One day of video might be dismissed as an isolated incident, but multiple days would prove that Sandra's behavior was ongoing and intentional. Marcus also wanted to give Sandra enough rope to hang herself, so to speak. The more outrageous her behavior became, the more serious the consequences would be when he finally decided to act. That evening, Marcus cleaned up the mess as usual, but this time he did it with a sense of purpose rather than defeat. Every piece of garbage he picked up was evidence of Sandra's character. Every moment he spent scraping food off his driveway was building toward her ultimate humiliation. Sandra thought she was winning this battle, but Marcus was already planning how to win the war. Over the next week, Marcus's hidden camera captured Sandra's trash can attacks with disturbing regularity. She had settled into a pattern of vandalism that showed just how much thought she was putting into tormenting him. Every day around noon, she would emerge from her house, look around to make sure no neighbors were watching, and then systematically destroy whatever Marcus had put out for collection. The videos revealed details that Marcus had missed while cleaning up the aftermath. Sandra wasn't just randomly knocking over his cans. She was deliberately targeting certain types of garbage to create maximum mess and humiliation. When she found cat food cans, she would open them and spread the contents across his driveway. If there were paper documents in his recycling, she would tear them into small pieces and scatter them like confetti. On Thursday, the camera captured something that made Marcus's blood boil. Sandra had brought her teenage son with her to help with the destruction. The boy, who looked to be about 15, seemed uncomfortable with what his mother was asking him to do, but he participated anyway. Sandra pointed at different bags and gave him instructions on how to spread the garbage most effectively. She was teaching her own child that bullying and vandalism were acceptable ways to handle disputes with neighbors. The most disturbing video came on Friday. Sandra arrived at Marcus's trash cans carrying a small container of cooking oil. She poured it over the spilled garbage, creating a slippery, greasy mess that would be nearly impossible to clean properly. Then she took photos of her handiwork with her phone, laughing as she captured different angles of the destruction. Marcus realized that Sandra was documenting her attacks for social media or to share with friends. She was so proud of her harassment campaign that she wanted to preserve it and show it off to others. This revelation helped Marcus understand that Sandra wasn't just taking out some personal frustration on him. She genuinely enjoyed causing him pain and humiliation, and she wanted an audience for her cruelty. By the weekend, Marcus had accumulated nearly 2 hours of video footage showing Sandra's systematic vandalism. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But Marcus was a methodical person who believed in covering all his bases before taking action. He decided to expand his documentation beyond just the video footage. On Saturday morning, Marcus visited Mrs. Peterson and asked if she would be willing to write down what she had witnessed over the past few weeks. The elderly woman was eager to help, and she provided a detailed written account of Sandra's behavior, including specific dates and times when she had observed the vandalism. Mrs. Peterson also mentioned that she had spoken with 2 other neighbors who had seen Sandra's attacks but were afraid to get involved because they didn't want to become her next targets. Marcus also began keeping a detailed log of the damage and cleanup costs. He photographed the mess each evening before cleaning it up, creating a visual record of the escalating destruction. He kept receipts for the cleaning supplies he had to buy and calculated the time he spent each day dealing with Sandra's vandalism. By his estimate, her harassment was costing him nearly 3 hours and $40 each week. The following Monday brought a new escalation that pushed Marcus closer to his breaking point. When he returned home from work, he found that Sandra had not only scattered his garbage but had also spray-painted profanity on his trash cans. The bright red letters spelling out crude insults were visible from the street, ensuring that every neighbor and passerby would see them. Marcus's hidden camera had captured the entire incident. The video showed Sandra approaching his cans with a spray paint can, looking around nervously before vandalizing his property. She had taken her time with the graffiti, carefully forming each letter to ensure maximum impact. After finishing, she had stepped back to admire her work and take photos before leaving. That night, Marcus made copies of all his video files and stored them in multiple locations. He printed still images from the most damaging footage and organized everything into a comprehensive file. His evidence now included nearly 3 weeks of video documentation, written witness statements, photographs of property damage, and financial records showing the cost of Sandra's harassment. As Marcus reviewed his evidence, he realized that Sandra had unknowingly provided him with everything he needed to destroy her reputation and possibly face legal consequences for her actions. She had been so confident in her bullying campaign that she had never considered the possibility that someone might be documenting her behavior. The irony was not lost on Marcus that Sandra's own arrogance and need for attention had created the evidence that would ultimately be used against her. If she had simply knocked over his trash cans and walked away, it would have been her word against his. But her desire to document and escalate her attacks had given Marcus proof that no reasonable person could dispute. Marcus also realized that Sandra had made a crucial miscalculation about his character. She had assumed that because he was quiet and didn't immediately retaliate, he was weak and helpless. She had no idea that he was the type of person who preferred to think through problems carefully and respond strategically rather than react emotionally in the heat of the moment. As Marcus prepared for bed that Monday night, he felt a sense of calm confidence that he had not experienced since Sandra's harassment began. Tomorrow he would begin implementing his plan for payback. Sandra thought she had been playing a game where she held all the cards, but Marcus was about to show her that he had been playing a completely different game all along. The spray-painted trash cans sitting in his garage were not just evidence of Sandra's escalating cruelty. They were also the final straw that convinced Marcus it was time to stop documenting and start acting. Sandra had pushed him far enough, and now she was about to learn that some quiet neighbors have very loud consequences waiting for those who mistake kindness for weakness. Marcus spent Tuesday evening crafting his strategy with the same careful attention he brought to everything else in his life. He had learned enough about Sandra's patterns to know that she typically attacked his trash cans between 11:30 and noon on weekdays, when most of the neighborhood was either at work or busy with daily routines. This timing had allowed her to operate without witnesses, but it also meant that Marcus could predict when she would strike next. His plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than confront Sandra directly or immediately involve authorities, Marcus decided to give her exactly what she seemed to want: an audience for her behavior. Sandra clearly enjoyed documenting her attacks and sharing them with others, so Marcus would ensure that her actions received the widest possible viewing audience. The first step was to expand his camera coverage. Marcus purchased 2 additional hidden cameras and positioned them to capture Sandra's approaches to his property from multiple angles. He wanted comprehensive footage that would show not just the vandalism itself, but also Sandra's deliberate planning and obvious enjoyment of the harassment. The 3 cameras working together would create a complete record that no one could claim was taken out of context or misunderstood. Marcus also began preparing for the social media aspect of his plan. He created accounts on several platforms and spent time learning how to edit and upload video content. He practiced combining footage from multiple cameras into a single, cohesive video that told the complete story of Sandra's harassment campaign. The finished product would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. On Wednesday morning, Marcus implemented phase 2 of his strategy. Instead of his usual trash bags, he filled his cans with special contents designed to make Sandra's vandalism even more obvious and outrageous. He included several bags of shredded paper mixed with bright-colored confetti that would scatter dramatically and be difficult to clean up. He also added containers of washable paint that would create colorful stains when Sandra inevitably kicked and stomped on his garbage. The paint was a stroke of genius. Marcus had chosen colors that would show up clearly on video and leave temporary stains on shoes and clothing. Anyone who participated in vandalizing his trash would carry evidence of their actions with them for hours afterward. The paint was non-toxic and would wash out eventually, but it would serve as a temporary mark of shame for anyone who chose to participate in the destruction. Marcus's cameras captured Sandra's Wednesday attack in perfect detail. She arrived at his cans with her usual confident swagger, unaware that she was about to become the star of her own humiliation video. When she kicked over the first can, brightly colored confetti exploded across the area like a celebration of her own stupidity. The second can released a cloud of rainbow-colored paint powder that covered Sandra's shoes, pants, and hands in vibrant evidence of her vandalism. The look of shock and anger on Sandra's face as she realized she had been covered in paint was priceless. She tried to brush the colorful powder off her clothes, but it only smeared and spread further. Her white sneakers were now streaked with purple and green stains that would announce her guilt to anyone who saw her for the rest of the day. But Sandra's pride wouldn't let her retreat. Instead of leaving immediately, she became more aggressive, using her feet to spread the paint and confetti as far as possible. Her anger at being tricked into marking herself only made her actions more violent and obvious to the cameras. She was literally creating her own evidence while staining herself with proof of her guilt. The video footage from Wednesday exceeded Marcus's expectations. The bright colors made Sandra's vandalism impossible to miss or misinterpret. The multiple camera angles captured her progression from confident bully to frustrated criminal, all while she unknowingly painted herself as the villain of her own story. Thursday brought an even better result. Sandra arrived at Marcus's trash cans wearing different clothes and shoes, clearly having learned from the previous day's paint incident. But Marcus had anticipated this adjustment and prepared accordingly. This time, his cans contained biodegradable glitter mixed with sticky foam that would adhere to anyone who disturbed it. When Sandra kicked over the first can, she was immediately covered in sparkling glitter that stuck to her clothes and skin. The foam created a slippery mess that made her lose her footing and fall backward into the scattered garbage. The cameras captured her sprawled on the ground, covered in glitter and garbage, with an expression of pure rage and humiliation on her face. Sandra's fall had been spectacular enough to attract the attention of several neighbors, including Mrs. Peterson, who came outside to see what had caused the commotion. This meant that Sandra's humiliation now had live witnesses in addition to the video documentation Marcus was collecting. As Sandra struggled to get up from the glittery mess, she began shouting threats at Marcus's house. Apparently assuming he was home and watching, she didn't realize that he was at work, completely removed from the scene while his cameras documented her meltdown. Her threats were being recorded in high-definition audio and video, adding criminal intimidation to the growing list of her documented offenses. Friday's attack was Sandra's most aggressive yet, but also her most thoroughly documented mistake. She arrived with a crowbar, apparently intending to not just knock over Marcus's cans but to destroy them completely. The cameras captured her using the tool to puncture holes in the cans and scatter their contents with deliberate malice. But Marcus had prepared his most elaborate trap yet. Hidden among the regular trash bags were several containers filled with a mixture that would create a terrible smell when exposed to air. As Sandra punctured the cans and bags, she released an odor so foul that she immediately began gagging and stumbling backward. The smell was so intense that it would cling to her clothes and hair for hours, creating another form of temporary marking that would follow her home. The combination of the previous day's glitter, paint stains, and now the terrible odor created a perfect storm of evidence and consequences. Sandra had literally marked herself as the perpetrator of the crimes while creating video evidence that could not be disputed or explained away. As Marcus reviewed the week's footage that Friday evening, he realized that Sandra had given him everything he needed to completely destroy her reputation and possibly her freedom. She had escalated from simple vandalism to property destruction with a weapon, all while being recorded in perfect detail. Her own arrogance and persistence had created a case so strong that no one could possibly take her side or claim that Marcus was exaggerating the harassment he had endured. Saturday morning marked the beginning of Marcus's final phase. He had spent the entire previous evening editing his collected footage into a comprehensive video that told the complete story of Sandra's harassment campaign. The final product was a masterpiece of evidence that began with her first casual kick at his trash cans and culminated in her wielding a crowbar while covered in glitter and reeking of the awful smell from Friday's trap. Marcus had organized the footage chronologically, showing how Sandra's behavior had escalated from petty vandalism to increasingly aggressive and criminal actions. He included multiple camera angles for the most damaging incidents, proving that the evidence could not have been staged or manipulated. The video clearly showed Sandra's face, her deliberate actions, and her obvious enjoyment of the destruction she was causing. The editing process had revealed details that Marcus had missed during the live events. Sandra often smiled or laughed while vandalizing his property, showing that she took genuine pleasure in causing him distress. The cameras had also captured her checking to make sure no one was watching before each attack, proving that she knew her actions were wrong and illegal. Marcus added captions to explain what viewers were seeing and included timestamps that corresponded with his written log of incidents. He also inserted brief text screens that explained the cost of cleanup and replacement of damaged items. The total financial impact of Sandra's harassment campaign was nearly $300, not counting the time Marcus had spent dealing with her vandalism. The final video was 18 minutes long and utterly damning. Anyone who watched it would see Sandra transform from a seemingly normal neighbor into an increasingly unhinged vandal who took pleasure in tormenting someone who had never done anything to harm her. The progression was clear and undeniable, making it impossible for Sandra to claim that her actions were justified or that Marcus had somehow provoked her behavior. Marcus's next step was to share the video strategically for maximum impact. He began by uploading it to several social media platforms with carefully crafted descriptions that explained the situation without inflammatory language. He simply stated the facts. Sandra had been vandalizing his property for weeks. He had documented her actions, and he was sharing the evidence so that others could see what type of person she really was. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the video had been viewed thousands of times and shared by hundreds of people. Comments poured in from viewers expressing outrage at Sandra's behavior and support for Marcus's patient documentation of the harassment. Many people shared similar stories of dealing with bullying neighbors, and Marcus's methodical approach became a model for how to handle such situations. Local community groups shared the video, and it quickly spread beyond Marcus's immediate neighborhood. Sandra's face and actions became known throughout the entire town as the video was shared on local community pages and neighborhood forums. Her behavior was so outrageous that people felt compelled to share the evidence with their friends and family. By Sunday morning, the video had gone viral within their community. Marcus began receiving messages from people who recognized Sandra and shared additional stories of her inappropriate behavior in other contexts. Former neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances came forward with accounts of Sandra's aggressive and entitled attitude in various situations. The social media exposure created consequences that Marcus had not anticipated but was pleased to see. Sandra's employer, a local real estate company, received numerous calls and emails from people who had seen the video. Potential clients expressed concern about being represented by someone who would engage in such petty and vindictive behavior. The company's online reviews were flooded with references to Sandra's vandalism. Sandra's son's school also became aware of the situation when other parents shared the video and expressed concern about the values being taught in Sandra's household. The video clearly showed her involving her teenage son in criminal vandalism, which raised questions about her fitness as a parent and role model. The video's viral success was amplified by Sandra's own past behavior. As more people came forward with their own stories of her bullying and harassment, it became clear that Marcus was not her first victim. Sandra had a pattern of targeting people she perceived as weak or unwilling to fight back, and the video evidence of her trash can attacks was just the latest example of her antisocial behavior. Marcus also took the video to local law enforcement on Monday morning. The police officer who reviewed the footage was amazed by the quality of the evidence and the clear escalation of Sandra's criminal behavior. The video showed multiple instances of vandalism, destruction of property, criminal mischief, and harassment. The officer noted that the crowbar incident could potentially be charged as a more serious felony offense. The officer explained that Marcus had created one of the most comprehensive evidence packages he had ever seen for this type of case. The combination of video footage, witness statements, financial documentation, and physical evidence made it impossible for Sandra to claim innocence or argue that the charges were unfounded. While the police prepared their case, the social media storm continued to grow. The video had now been viewed tens of thousands of times and shared across multiple states as people marveled at Sandra's audacity and Marcus's patient documentation. Sandra had become internet famous for all the wrong reasons, and her reputation was being destroyed by her own recorded actions. Local news stations picked up the story, intrigued by the methodical way Marcus had documented the harassment and the dramatic footage of Sandra's escalating vandalism. The story became a cautionary tale about bullying neighbors and the importance of documenting harassment before it escalates to dangerous levels. Marcus realized that his patience and planning had created consequences far beyond what he had originally envisioned. Sandra's attempt to bully and humiliate him had backfired spectacularly, turning her into a public example of how not to treat your neighbors. Her own actions, recorded in perfect detail, had become the instrument of her social and professional downfall. The quiet man who Sandra had thought would never fight back had delivered the most devastating counterpunch possible. He had given Sandra exactly what she seemed to want: attention and notoriety. But instead of being celebrated for her bullying, she was being universally condemned for behavior that everyone could see was cruel, petty, and ultimately criminal. The consequences for Sandra came swiftly and from multiple directions simultaneously. By Tuesday morning, the viral video had reached over 100,000 views, and Sandra's face had become recognizable throughout the region. She could no longer leave her house without being recognized as the woman who had spent weeks tormenting her quiet neighbor for no reason other than her own cruel entertainment. The legal ramifications were the first to materialize. Police arrested Sandra on multiple charges including vandalism, destruction of property, criminal mischief, and harassment. The crowbar incident was charged as a felony due to the use of a weapon in the commission of a crime. The video evidence made it impossible for Sandra to claim innocence, and her lawyer advised her that fighting the charges would only result in additional legal costs and public humiliation. Sandra's employer acted quickly to distance the company from her behavior. The real estate firm received hundreds of negative reviews and threatening calls from people who had seen the video. Within 3 days of the video going viral, Sandra was terminated from her job. Her employer released a public statement saying that Sandra's behavior was inconsistent with the company's values and that they could not continue to employ someone who had demonstrated such poor judgment and character. The financial impact on Sandra was severe and immediate. In addition to losing her job, she faced thousands of dollars in legal fees, court costs, and restitution payments to Marcus for the property damage she had caused. The court ordered her to pay for the replacement of Marcus's damaged trash cans, cleaning supplies, and the time he had spent dealing with her vandalism. The total came to over $1,500, far more than Sandra had probably imagined when she began her harassment campaign. Sandra's social isolation was perhaps the most devastating consequence of all. The video had revealed her true character to everyone in the community, and people were no longer willing to associate with her. Former friends stopped returning her calls, and invitations to social events dried up completely. Even her extended family began distancing themselves from Sandra after seeing how she had behaved toward an innocent neighbor. The impact on Sandra's son was particularly heartbreaking. Other parents at his school had seen the video of Sandra involving him in vandalizing Marcus's property, and many no longer wanted their children associating with him. The teenager, who had seemed uncomfortable participating in his mother's harassment campaign, was now paying the price for her poor judgment and criminal behavior. Marcus, meanwhile, was experiencing a completely different kind of attention. The methodical way he had documented Sandra's harassment and the patient manner in which he had gathered evidence before acting had made him something of a folk hero. People admired his restraint and strategic thinking, and many reached out to thank him for showing how to handle bullying neighbors without stooping to their level. Local news stations interviewed Marcus, and he used the opportunity to encourage other harassment victims to document incidents thoroughly before taking action. He emphasized that his success had come from staying calm, gathering comprehensive evidence, and then letting Sandra's own actions speak for themselves. Marcus had never raised his voice, never threatened retaliation, and never engaged in the kind of behavior that Sandra had demonstrated throughout their conflict. The hardware store where Marcus worked saw an unexpected boost in business as people sought him out to thank him for his handling of the situation and to ask for advice about their own difficult neighbors. Marcus's boss gave him a raise and additional responsibilities, recognizing that his methodical problem-solving approach was exactly the kind of thinking the store needed. Mrs. Peterson became something of a celebrity in her own right as the neighbor who had witnessed Sandra's attacks and been willing to provide written testimony. Her detailed observations had been crucial to Marcus's case, and she enjoyed telling the story to anyone who would listen. The elderly woman had lived in the neighborhood for decades and said she had never seen anything as satisfying as watching Sandra's bullying behavior backfire so completely. 6 months after the video went viral, Sandra was forced to sell her house and move out of the neighborhood. The combination of legal costs, job loss, and social isolation had made it impossible for her to maintain her mortgage payments. She had also become so notorious that potential buyers were reluctant to purchase a home from someone they recognized as the neighborhood bully from the viral video. Marcus purchased Sandra's house at a significant discount through a real estate agent, ensuring that he would never again have to deal with a problematic neighbor in that particular direction. He converted the property into a rental and was able to carefully screen tenants to ensure that only respectful, quiet people would live there. The irony was not lost on Marcus that Sandra's harassment campaign had ultimately resulted in her losing everything while he gained financial benefit from her downfall. Her attempts to make his life miserable had backfired so completely that she had essentially paid him for the privilege of destroying her own reputation and future. The video continued to circulate online for years afterward, serving as a permanent reminder of the consequences of bullying behavior. Sandra's name became synonymous with neighborhood harassment, and the footage was often shared in community groups as an example of how not to treat your neighbors. Her moment of viral infamy ensured that her poor choices would follow her wherever she tried to rebuild her life. Marcus kept the security cameras installed permanently, though he never again needed to use them for anything more serious than monitoring package deliveries. The cameras served as a visible deterrent to anyone who might consider causing problems, and word had spread throughout the community that Marcus was not someone to mess with, despite his quiet demeanor. 3 years later, Marcus received a letter from Sandra, attempting to apologize for her behavior and asking him to consider having the video removed from social media platforms. She claimed to have learned from her mistakes and said that the continued circulation of the footage was preventing her from finding employment and rebuilding her life. Marcus read the letter carefully and considered her request for several days. Ultimately, he decided not to respond or take any action to remove the videos. Sandra had made her choices freely and had seemed to enjoy every moment of her harassment campaign. The consequences she was experiencing were the natural result of her own documented actions, not anything that Marcus had done to her. The letter did make Marcus reflect on how dramatically their situations had changed. Sandra had gone from being the neighborhood bully, who thought she could torment anyone without consequences, to becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating quiet people. Marcus had transformed from an unknown target of harassment to a respected community member whose story inspired others to stand up to bullies in their own lives. Marcus never saw Sandra again after she moved away, but he occasionally heard updates about her struggles through mutual acquaintances. She had difficulty finding steady employment because potential employers would often discover the viral video during background checks. Her reputation followed her to each new community, making it difficult to establish new relationships or integrate socially. The contrast between their outcomes served as a powerful reminder that actions have consequences. Even when people think no one is watching or documenting their behavior, Sandra had learned too late that, in an age of smartphones and social media, there is no such thing as private bad behavior when it affects other people. Marcus's story became legendary in their town and spread to neighboring communities as well. People would point out his house to visitors and tell the story of how the quiet hardware store employee had outsmarted and exposed the neighborhood bully, using nothing but patience, planning, and Sandra's own criminal behavior. The tale served multiple purposes in community folklore. It reassured victims of harassment that there were effective ways to fight back without becoming bullies themselves. It warned potential troublemakers that their actions might be documented and exposed. Most importantly, it demonstrated that sometimes the most devastating response to aggression is simply giving bullies enough rope to hang themselves while carefully documenting every moment of their self-destruction. Years later, Marcus would occasionally watch the original video and marvel at how perfectly everything had worked out. Sandra's own arrogance and cruelty had created every piece of evidence needed to destroy her reputation and livelihood. Her assumption that Marcus was too weak to fight back had blinded her to the possibility that he might be gathering ammunition for a strategic counterstrike that would be far more devastating than anything she could have imagined. The quiet man had proven that the most dangerous opponents are often those who think before they act, plan before they react, and document everything before they seek justice. Sandra had wanted to play a game of intimidation and harassment, but Marcus had turned it into a chess match where every move she made only strengthened his position while weakening her own.